Thank you for making it very concise, giving us something to learn and start learning from. So let me say a few words about the next speaker. He is popularly known as Space Raccoon, who hacks for good. He was one of the 5 selected from 1 million white hat hackers for HackerOne Elite Hall of Fame. His research works are featured in conferences like Black Hat and DEF CON. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker for the closing note today about trends in vulnerability research. Please help me welcome to the stage Eugene Lim.
Thank you. Hi everyone, we're almost at the end. Today I'm just going to give you the closing note for B-Sides Ahmedabad. So give yourself a round of applause just for making it so far. We're almost there. And also, thank you so much for coming. I know some of you guys have made journeys 22 hours. I don't know, like I've heard more, like several days, but I really appreciate all of you guys coming out today. And I was invited here to give you the closing note, so let's see if that's up. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. Oh. There we go. All right, cool. Yeah, so today I'm going to be talking about hackers shifting left too. So you might have heard about this term, shifting left, because nowadays developers, organizations, they're aware of people trying to hack them, they're aware of how there are vulnerabilities in their code, and they have this new term called shifting left. And one of the ironies I think in cybersecurity is that the more people improve their systems, the more defenses they build, the more creative hackers get. And some of the things that come out are just incredible. So I just want to talk a bit more about that. But before that, giving you a quick introduction to myself. My name is Eugene, and I come from Singapore. My hacker handle is Space Raccoon. So that's my blog. I have a Twitter, a LinkedIn as well. But yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any questions after this talk as well. So yeah, I just wanted to celebrate a lot of the great talks today. I tried to attend all of them, but I can't be in 2 places at once. We had really good talks at the Drone Hacking Village. We had good talks at the panels, and of course from our main and bounty tracks as well. Those were, I think, they brought to mind kind of interesting thoughts I had about this closing note. And the biggest thought I had was community, right? Because my journey in InfoSec really began with community. I got into InfoSec in 2019, at the start of 2019, about almost 3 years ago now. And what came out of that was because the Singapore government had a bug bounty program, and they invited all the cybersecurity community members to join. And back then, I didn't know anything about cybersecurity. I was just going to these talks, trying to learn about cybersecurity, a talk like this, and they just invited us to join. And that's where I got found my first bug, but it was a duplicate, right? So that was super frustrating. And I went back to the board. I went to the Hacker 101 CTF website, as well as the community, which is a Discord channel. And back then, they only had like a couple hundred members. And on any given day, I think there was less than 100 active members. And the last time I checked, there were actually more than 10,000 members in the Hacker 101 Discord today. So it's just amazing how much the community in both bug bounty and InfoSec has grown internationally as well as in diversity. And this is a picture of me with some of the guys. You might know some of them. I think Stoke is in there. Yeah, Stoke is. He spoke in 2 years ago at the first edition of B-Sides Ahmedabad. And this was the Disturbance team. And really, I think this was kind of how I felt very welcome into the InfoSec community. And I hope that we can all give that back as well at these conferences. And as I mentioned, I started in InfoSec. I don't have much experience. I've only worked for about 3.5 years so far. And in 2019, I really started with the basics, right? IDOR, cross-site scripting, business logic. And I got my first bounty several months in after my duplicate, and that's what really, I think, motivated me to keep going, because we all like getting rewards. We all like, having that rush of finding a real bug. And in November 2019, I was able to attend the live hacking event, H1213, which was the live hacking event on the US Air Force, UK Ministry of Defense, as well as Yahoo. And I was able to win the Most Valuable Hacker Award. And in March 2020, about a year later, I entered the Global Top 100. But that was back then. That was almost more than 3 years ago now. And these days, I've kind of started going into more different kinds of vulnerabilities. I'm interested in native client vulnerabilities, Windows exploits, code review, And more of these things are kind of what I do in terms of when I look at a bug bounty program today. These days, I'm in the global top 40, but if you've been in the bug bounty scene for a while, you notice that a lot of people, they spend maybe 2 or 3 years being super active on bug bounty, and then they get a job, they start a business, they have a family, and they get a bit less active. So for me, I kind of like, I don't really like to chase the reputation on the leaderboard anymore, but it's something that I'm still trying to work on in terms of developing my skills instead. And I think in the same way, while the bug bounty community and me personally have changed in terms of my approach, I think a lot of the developers and the rest of the hackers that you see nowadays have changed their approach, right? There are a lot of, I think in InfoSec, I think there's a lot of trendy topics, right? There are a lot of trendy topics like supply chain, SaaS, DaaS, CI/CD, and the same thing happens with the hackers as well. When the hackers, you see that they're using a lot more automation. They're doing stuff like dependency confusion. They're adding more fuzzing. People are going to zero-day hunting. We see a lot of movement in the bug bounty community towards higher value exploits, more impactful bugs, as well as more scale, because now they're scanning the internet, I think, 24/7. And so that brings me to today's, my main topic for today's closing note, which is shifting left, right? And shifting left is kind of an idea that companies have, a lot of developers have in DevSecOps, in all kinds of paradigms, that they need to shift earlier in the software development chain cycle. So when you think of an application, when it goes out into the world, it's pushed to the production, people hack it, right? And it's not a sustainable way of doing security. So what people are doing these days in terms of organizations, in terms of developers, is that they're adding a lot of these checks earlier on in your supply chain. So before you even submit a code to production, or whenever you commit some code to your repository, it's going to be automatically scanned for vulnerabilities. I think we saw some great products today being demonstrated about static code scans. It's going to be fuzz. It's also going to be some dynamic analysis. And of course, further down, you're also going to have stuff like protection in your secrets. They're going to be adding some kind of verifications. And these are all things that are happening further in the product cycle. So in the ideal case, that should stop a lot of vulnerabilities before they come out into the wild. So I'm just going to pause for a second and think about a quote from, well, it's not really an InfoSec book, it's more like a fictional book. But what is a history teacher? Someone who teaches past mistakes. And I think the interesting thing is that whenever you get a newfangled technology, whether it's Web3 or DevSecOps, CI/CD, stuff like that, we kind of see the same things happening over and over again. So when you think of CI/CD, a lot of people use stuff like GitHub Actions or GitLab pipelines in order to preserve, to run these tests, right? So whenever you commit a code to your repository, it's going to run all of these checks. And what we see here is that even simple stuff like command injections are very common in CI/CD. We see exploits happening across even big companies and organizations like Google, Apache, and other open source projects. So this is hackers hacking shift left technology, right? This is not even hacking other parts of the stack as well. And meanwhile, hackers are using the same tools to automate their workflows. So in the static side of things, we've seen the great work with CloudSec and with some of the tools that are being used for code scanning. They're basically running a lot of these static code analysis tools across the entire open source web. Or they're obtaining some of these code either through decompiling applications or through the JavaScript code of websites. And then they're also running their scanners on these tools. On the other hand, with the dynamic analysis, we've seen again with Nuclei, with Burp Scanner, as well as other tools, that hackers are also automating their tools. So even as we are building these things for developers, for organizations to secure their own stack, hackers are also using these tools. And that's becoming more of an issue with these things. And one significant development in the recent years with regards to scanners is fuzzy scanners. And I think the CloudSec guys mentioned smart fuzzing, right? I think maybe this is kind of a variation of that, which is fuzzy scanners. And Portsugo is really one of the big organizations that really went big into this, where they developed the /powered scanner. And what this is basically, instead of just doing a simple signature-based scan, where you maybe like a Nuclei template, you send past vulnerability and you try to catch a past vulnerability. What you're doing instead is that you're fuzzing a little bit. You're sending strange input. You're sending maybe backslashes, or you're sending new lines. You're not just looking for a specific vulnerability. You're looking for what appears to be a vulnerability. And one interesting thing about this is that it's really difficult to do this kind of fuzzy scanning, because firstly, it's going to take a lot of memory. So I'm not sure if you run /powered scanner in your burp suite. Have any of you guys used /powered scanner before? Yeah, I see a few hands. Yeah. It takes these several gigs of memory, I think. And it only gets worse the more you explore an application. Another challenge with this is that it only looks for injection-based vulnerabilities. So it's going to inject in the parameters. It's going to try to maybe cause a crash or cause some interesting behavior. But it doesn't look for more, well, sometimes it does, but it doesn't look for a whole host of other bugs. It might be misconfigurations. It might look for, like, for example, business logic, authorization, authentication. That takes a little more fuzzing in order to get to. It requires state-based fuzzing, which is a whole other different challenge that I'm not going to go into today. But what we've seen basically is that hackers are being more aware of the need to both fuzz as well as to scan at scale. And this has led to the rise of fuzzy scanners. And my observation here is that I think in the long run, from what we have seen today, as well as all over in the InfoSec conferences, on Twitter, the sharings that we have, is that we're going to see a movement towards both a combination, I think, of both the static and dynamic side of scanning, right? People are going to do instrumentation. They're going to do a lot more, even smarter fuzzing and scanning at scale. And this is something that we have to look out for, especially as we move towards more open source projects and Web3. So when we think about secure by default, we think about shifting left. One of the biggest solutions that they have is secure by default frameworks, right? So instead of just building your own Express application over and over again, why not you use a popular application framework like Next.js? You can even use Rails. And the advantages of these frameworks is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel again, right? Developers can rely on the fact that they can maybe declare an API. They can just, they can look at how they want to define the API, and it's just going to be pushed to the web, and it's going to be pretty much, it's not going to be doing a lot of the actual handling of the request data. It's just going to do exactly what you do. We also see that with, for example, Lambda. So you're going to see that with a lot of these cloud serverless applications. What they do is basically they encapsulate your business logic in very small lines of code. So you reduce the amount of attack surface that you actually can cause problems with. But, hackers love hacking frameworks as well. You might have seen this really good post by Sam Curry about exploiting Web3's hidden attack surface, universal XSS in the, one of the Next.js libraries. So I think one thing, I've observed when I was working on, say, mobile applications, or I've seen the rise of React Native, for example, and a lot of these frameworks that remove simple vulnerabilities such as XSS, because you're going to find it really hard to find an XSS in React these days. So instead, I think hackers have been very clever. They've been very smart. They're starting to upgrade. They're going to up their game, and they're moving towards the frameworks. They're attacking the frameworks directly. I think we might have seen something earlier with earlier this week with the Akamai WEF. But the Next.js library vulnerability is, I think, an excellent example of how, by simply targeting the pyramid of the supply chain, attackers can then exploit, a whole hundreds, millions of websites all at once. And this shows that hackers are shifting left in their hacking. They're starting to think not just at the application level, application code level, they're moving up into the framework level. They're starting to exploit even higher up this chain. So this is something that you need to think about as well, because as companies are securing their code through secure by default frameworks and all kinds of DevSecOps tools, you're not going to find the typical vulnerabilities anymore, and you're going to have to move up this chain. I think Shubs is an excellent example as well as one of these hackers. I think Yassine mentioned him as a zero-day hunter. One of the biggest trends I've observed in the bug bounty space is more hunters going into the zero-day space. And I think there's a whole discussion to be had about the ethics of using 0 days for bounties, but it's not for today. We can argue about it on Twitter, and I'm not going to argue with you on Twitter. The second thing is how secure are your controlled supply chains? So another trend in shift left security is that they're going to use stuff like SBOMs, which is basically a software bill of materials, where companies run software that immediately catalogs all their dependencies, all of the software, the commercial software they're using, so that you can easily check if there are known vulnerabilities for that. You might have encountered this when you ran npm install on your application, and once you installed it, they said, oh, your application has 0 known vulnerabilities, audit vulnerabilities. And this is an example of shifting left, because instead of waiting for you to push your application with the vulnerability dependency to the production, to the web, what's going to happen is that the software is going to tell you, hey, wait, before you deploy, it's actually vulnerable, right? There's a CVE for that. You have seen that maybe in GitHub when you have a project and Dependabot tells you, hey, your dependency is vulnerable. And this is all part of shifting left security. And I think that has done a lot of good in securing a lot of applications that we have out there. But we got to think about, okay, how are hackers exploiting this? So yeah, I mean, you guys know about dependency confusion probably, but Alex has done, again, excellent work in supply chain dependency confusion, right? How they're exploiting the use of all of these package managers, a lot of these tools that supposedly secure your pipeline because they're going to make sure that you're the most updated version of your code. And that's exactly how supply chain dependency confusion works, right? Because it pushes what's supposedly the next highest version, and because your software wants to be the most updated, the most secure, it's going to automatically update you sometimes. Or when you install, it's automatically going to select the latest version. And that's how hackers have also shifted left. So you might be thinking that you're on the latest version, but hackers are the latest version. And that's one way that we are moving left as well. And now we think about how secure are our sandbox programming languages. So one of the apex of secure coding by default of shift left security is that once you start from, say, the CI/CD static code analysis, you move up to secure frameworks, you build your own secure frameworks, and then you move up to what's supposedly the holy grail. You have secure programming languages, right? So we see that a lot with, say, Rust. We see that a lot with even like sandbox programming languages. And I have to say that, you know, there's no target that hackers won't hack, right? So I think, you know, I'm not an expert on this, but I've seen stuff like, you know, a lot of sharings on stuff where people are hacking programming languages themselves, finding, say, memory corruption bugs, or they're looking at the standard libraries of these programming languages. So if you look at the source code of Go, and you should, you'll notice that some of it just looks a little funky because they want support for all kinds of things. Recently, I wrote a Capture the Flag challenge that looked into the extended standard library of Golang, which is a web dev library, and thought about how you could exploit that if it's used blindly. And this is something that you need to think about as well, because when you look at an application, you think, okay, maybe I just want to hack the application. But what if I not just hack the application, I move up further the chain, and I've seen some amazing work, so for example, in fuzzing Java, so breaking out of the sandbox, doing memory corruption. With Solidity, you can also do some memory corruption as it compiles the code and it translates that. But important thing to think of here is how hackers are also moving up this chain. And with these three examples, I think it's safe to conclude that hackers don't just shift left, right? They take the path of least resistance. And, you know, companies are getting really, really good at securing the code at the software level, the application level. They have lots of code reviews, they have static analysis tools, they have secure frameworks. But when you make that more secure, hackers are just going to go somewhere else. And where's that somewhere else? I think in this current moment, a lot of hackers are looking at third-party libraries. Third-party libraries or the frameworks that people are using. So CMSs are very popular. They're also looking at stuff like the frameworks, as we've seen with Next.js libraries. And this is where hackers are at. I think a big number of hackers are at as well. They're also looking at supply chain. So they're basically poisoning the supply chain through dependency confusion. Or they're also looking at maybe dangling packages. But basically, what I've seen as well is that we've seen a trend of bug bounty people community not just looking at software anymore, but they're also looking at the rest of the supply chain. So this is kind of a trend that we all have to be aware of, because as a hacker, you're going to be competing with people who are further up the chain, right? You might be finding day-to-day application logic vulnerabilities. You might be finding, you know, misconfigurations. But in the long run, companies are trying to solve these problems fundamentally. And if you've hacked at some of the, I think, the more advanced programs, for example, from big tech, you will also notice that they learn from their mistakes. They never make the same mistake twice, which is really frustrating as a bug bounty hunter, but it's also very impressive from a technical standpoint. So I think whenever we see stuff coming out with a write-up, with every new write-up, with every new exploit, we saw today, for example, some discussion about how AWS has shifted from IMDS v1 to v2. That's an example of big tech solving problems at the fundamental level. And we're no longer going to be able to exploit the same chain as hackers. We're going to have to move up the chain, or we're going to have to find something else. So yeah, this brings the question, as a hacker, how do I shift left? And I kind of left this a little more open-ended, but I can talk to my experiences, and we can also, I think, do some questions as well. But for me personally, I have two strategies. My first strategy as a hacker is that I try to learn other domains, right? So maybe web is getting hard. Everyone's using React. I can't find an XSS, maybe, right? Or maybe mobile applications, APKs are being hardened because all of these companies, they run Android manifest scans before they deploy to the cloud. So you'll never see, for example, an unauthenticated Firebase anymore, right? You're not going to find those very often. But maybe the CloudSec guys might beg to differ. They might have found a lot of them. I haven't scanned 1 million applications, so that'd be cool. But what I would do in that situation is that you as a hacker, when you find yourself plateauing, when you find yourself thinking, oh, I'm just doing the same thing over and over again, I'm not really improving, I am not finding these awesome killer bugs, right, that we have talked about today. One way I've done is by shifting to other domains. So when I first started out in bug bounty, I started out in web, but then I shifted to mobile, and now I'm shifting to native. And I don't know where I'll shift to next, but I'll keep shifting, right? So for you as a hacker, you got to keep looking at other domains. Don't just stick to web. Stick to, explore other platforms, other frameworks, as well as other ways of hacking, right? So that's a way to move laterally within hacking. The second strategy that I use is just don't play the hacking game, right? Learn non-hacking skills. And what do I mean by that? So, for example, I think one of the kind of curses of bug bounty is that when you first start learning bug bounty, you're really motivated because you want your first bug, right? You want to start making money, you want to do well in the bug bounty community. So you learn a lot. And then once you start getting bounties, once you've reached a certain level where you're able to consistently get bugs, it's very hard to stop. You're being like, oh, okay, I should really learn this Web3 thing, or I should really learn this dependency confusion thing. Or I could look at this new challenge that's starting tonight at 12 a.m. and I could hack for the rest of the week and try to find bugs. And that's a consistent problem I faced as a hacker, where my time is extremely limited, but I don't have the time to learn more. I just think, oh, maybe I should hack, right? But that's a great way to stay at the same place, to plateau at your level of skill and keep you, just finding the same bugs over and over again. And sometimes you really have to put the hard stop to yourself and say, all right, I'm not going to hack, I'm going to do something else. And you might be surprised at how effective this makes you as a hacker. So for me personally, at some point, I think after getting the global top 100, I told myself, okay, that's kind of the milestone that I've reached. And it's time for me to learn something else. And that's when I went, for example, into machine learning. I went into reverse engineering, malware reverse engineering. Different areas, they're not hacking per se. It might be cybersecurity related, they might be tech related, but they're not hacking. And when I came back to web hacking, I actually realized I could do so much more, right? Because instead of just looking at a web application through burp, I could now maybe see if they have any open source code, or even if they have like a native library from the Android application, and I could reverse engineer that, and I could see what I could do with that. So I think when it comes to hacking, I think a lot of bug bounty hunters as well as researchers are hyper-focused on finding the bug. And sometimes, taking a walk or going out might solve the problem, but sometimes you might need a completely different domain of knowledge altogether. One of the most consistent patterns I've seen at live hacking events is that you have a complete newcomer come in and absolutely destroy the competition, right? Everyone's like, oh, I've done this for 1, 2 years. This is my 20th live hacking event, and you have a complete newbie come in. Well, not a newbie, because they're going to find the most crazy bugs. And the main point of this is because they come from completely different skill sets. different perspectives, and they're able to see in a way that you don't. Because hacking is all about finding that missing piece of the puzzle that's missing, and that only you know, right? So I've seen people, you might have seen some of these interviews as well, come in with marketing experience, or maybe they're even doctors, right? I think Riz is one of the famous guys who's a fireman, I think, right? And they're able to immediately do very well in the bug bounty community because they have all these different perspectives that they bring into their work. Another way that you can do this is that I think it's been hammered over and over again, is that you can collaborate with other people. But at the end of the day, I think it's really important that when you hit a plateau, when you feel like you've hit a certain ceiling in terms of your skills, it's time to do something else, right? You could maybe do more coding. So for example, I picked up Golang and Rust and did a bunch of cryptography challenges, and that made me better at finding cryptography bugs as well. But all of these things are just part of this central challenge, right? How do you do hacking differently? So these are the two strategies that I've discussed today, and kind of the learning journey I had over the past 2 years. As I mentioned, I'm really new to cybersecurity, but this is how I started, right? I started with web. And maybe I was pretty good at code review because I came from a web development background. And I was able to maybe understand DOM XSS better. I think XSS is one of those tricky little subjects that we think is really easy to teach, but it's actually really difficult for a beginner to learn. I've done courses where it's like, oh, intro to hacking, and I try to teach XSS. But then you realize that in order to learn XSS, you got to learn HTML, you got to learn JavaScript, you got to understand what the JavaScript does with your APIs. Whereas it might be much easier to teach info disclosure, for example. But because I came from a web development background, I was able to pick this up a lot easier. And after web, I went into mobile. So I explored maybe iOS, doing simple, simple pulling of iOS files and looking for secrets and looking for low-hanging fruit. But I didn't get very, very far because when it comes to iOS, you're going to hit reverse engineering at some point. You're going to look at this huge compiled binary and it's going to be very scary. And you don't know what to do with it, right? You can run strings on it, yeah, okay. And then what's next? So I hit a plateau with that. And afterwards, I went into development. So I looked at, for example, machine learning. I did IBM quantum computing in summer school. I did Rust, Golang programming. And that helped me be a little better with my scripting. But it also helped me understand where developers are building the code and how they're making their mistakes. And then next, I went to reverse engineering. And this is a whole other rabbit hole, I think. That's more bug bounty hunters should learn reverse engineering. It's another skill set that's really difficult to teach, mainly because there are very few good reverse engineering, offensive reverse engineering courses out there. And so my recommendation to you is that instead of trying to learn offensive reverse engineering, how do you reverse engineer an application and find vulnerabilities in it, I recommend you pick up an adjacent skill, which is malware reverse engineering. And the cool thing about malware reverse engineering is that malware developers, they try to hide from you. They try to obfuscate their code. They make the decompiled code really difficult to interpret. And so when you kind of do malware reverse engineering, you kind of jump several levels in this journey because you're going to learn how to deobfuscate code. You're going to maybe learn how to deal with assembly code. I hope you don't have to, but most times you do. One of the things I did as well was that I did the Flare-On challenge. So Flare-On just started, but if you're not aware of what Flare-On is basically a malware reverse engineering, kind of like a competition of sorts, but basically you're given 10 levels, they give you a binary to reverse engineer, and you get the flag, and you get maybe a coin at the end of it. So I recommend that maybe if you want to start, maybe you can start on Flare-On today. I think it's going to launch really soon, or it has launched already. As well as I got comfortable with assembly because I was working on binary exploitation. And that moved to the next level, where I was moving on to native exploits, working in the Windows userland, memory corruption vulnerabilities, where I finally got to know what return-oriented programming is, right? So this is all to say is that maybe if I had only stuck to the web, I would have been doing okay, right? I'll be finding the same bugs, it'll be fairly consistent, but I don't think that would have made me a better hacker. I think what makes us a better hacker today is really shifting left, learning to deal with all of these changes in the bug bounty world. I think one of the questions that came up to me when I was talking to you guys was, how do you keep up in InfoSec? Because there's always something new, right? Well, if there's always something new, then learn something new, right? There's never going to be a piece of code that's going to be secure forever or insecure forever. Because companies are going to look at that, be like, there's no reason why we should keep repeating the same mistake, and they're going to build tools to secure that at scale. And so you as a hacker should learn how to exploit things at scale, right? Move up the chain and shift left in your hacking. And I think one of the most important things here is how important it is to share. And I think I was really inspired by all the talks today, really fantastic talks, because of how much hackers were willing to go into their bugs in detail and share, right? Hussein, I think you shared some really amazing bugs at your talk on steroids. Yeah, and that was just the kind of things that makes you think, oh, I should have done that. So for you, whether you're starting out, whether you've been here for several years, whether you've been a veteran, I think one of the most important things for me as a beginner, because it's still new to me, having been in the industry only for 3 years, was how important it was to learn from all of these articles. Even if they were very short, maybe kind of crappy, like medium articles that say, oh, I got this awesome bounty and this is how I did that. Never underestimate how important that is for beginners and how much that will feed back into you. I think a lot of what we've seen in the bug bounty community is the development of new strategies, new tools that emerged really from sharing. So when the desync attacks came out, HTTP smuggling, we saw, for example, new bug bounty hunters rise up just on the basis of finding HTTP smuggling bugs. And this is a trend that you're going to see. You're going to see people entering just because you shared something, right? And I think it's important to just keep sharing, keep caring, and also be kind, right? I think one of the benefits, or at least one of the good cultural aspects of the InfoSec community is that people really try to be kind online. So let's keep being kind, let's keep sharing, and let's keep this spirit going in the InfoSec community. All of you play a part. Thank you. So that kind of brings me back to the original point of my closing note today, right? I was asked to give a closing note, not a technical talk, and I was kind of intimidated by that because most of the time I give very technical talks. But that brings me to the first point I made today, which is that I started from community. And all of you are part of this community. And one of the most important things about community is the builders of community. So I really want to give a huge thanks to the organizing committee, Nix, and the rest of the B-Sides Ahmedabad team. Let's give them a round of applause for making this happen. Like I said, how I started in bug bounty was that the government in Singapore had a bug bounty program. But how they were able to get to me was that they shared this invite. They told the local community leaders, hey, who is interested in hacking? Share this invite with them, right? And if I was not part of this community, if this community was not created by our builders, our community builders, our community makers, it would never have happened. I would never have entered info security. And that's what I love about this industry. I mean, Twitter can get a little toxic at times, but we try, right? And we try to keep ourselves open. We understand that anyone could come from anywhere and just absolutely destroy a hacking program, right? You might see people who might learn the bad way of doing things, and we try to keep them on a good path. But that's all what we are here for today, is that we're here to learn from each other, we're here to build with each other, and in the end, we're going to break things with each other. So keep hacking, keep breaking, and build a community. Thank you.